Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of How to Leave a Cult. I am your host, Brooke Walker. And if this is your first time here, I always like to let everybody know that this is a story about my life growing up in a religious cult called the Church of Immortal Consciousness. And it pretty much runs from me being about 8 years old to being in my mid 30s. We're currently I think I'm 18 and where we're at in the story right now. But if you're new here, it's kind of hard to pick up in the middle, but you're more than welcome to try. um, the cult was in Arizona, Mesa, and then it moved up to Payson, outside of Payson. And it was ran by a woman who was a trance medium. And then they would do workshops and seminars around the US, and then eventually they created a community that people moved towards them. It was abusive, it was manipulative, it was based on control and leveraging people for the purpose of power, for the purpose of access to finances. And this is my story from a very young age growing up in it. And as I share my story, I also discuss the things I've done since then to heal, and hope that in my sharing my story that it might help somebody else who's been through some type of religious abuse. So, welcome. Our last episode, we had our first guest, which was a previous member. If you want to hear just a tidbit of what the cult was about, that's a great one to listen to because it kind of gives a synopsis in just a single episode. But if you're back for the story, so the last one I talked about, I kind of left off with my relationship with Colin, talking about some of the rules of the cult and the teachings it was based off of. So Colin was the relationship that I was put into. He had come in following his brother, who had been a bodyguard for us. So his brother's name was Brian. Brian was in a relationship with Jessica, who was the cult leader's daughter, their youngest daughter. And we're going to dive right into this episode, which is kind of picking up where we left off. So Jessica and Brian's relationship was always tumultuous, just like everybody's was, because there was no natural ability to have a relationship in the cult. It was all based on expectation. And so that made it incredibly difficult. And I talked a lot about that in the last episode prior to the one where we speak with David. But right around that time, Brian and Colin, brothers, they had a family member pass away. And I can't remember if it was a great-grandparent or exactly who it was, but they had a family member pass away. So they get the phone call, and I believe it was the mother's side of the family. And so they're going to go to Minnesota, but there's not enough money for them to fly. So they had to use one of the vehicles, and they had to drive to Minnesota, and they only had a couple days. So they had to drive all night and attend a funeral and then drive back. Now, what I understand is that before Brian left, I believe that he was told that it was expected that he needed to try to get some money from his mom. That was a very regular thing. Church members were consistently leveraged to get money from family members. So a lot of people were not bringing in an enormous amount because a lot of them were working for family businesses. At the time, Brian and Lane Camp, Lane is Jessica's older brother. He was one of Trina and Steven's children, had been building a business around private investigating. And they were private investigators and, did multiple things towards that. So I don't know if it made much, if any, money. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I have no idea. But him and Colin had to go to the family thing, and then he was leveraged to get money. So when he came back, he didn't come back with anything. I don't know that his mother had any money to leverage anyway. And so I know it became an issue with him and Jessica. And I know him and Jessica, sometime thereafter, Brian, and again, I don't know the conversations, but Brian and Jessica moved away, and Jessica being Trina and Steven's youngest daughter. So they moved to the Valley and move in with one of Brian's best friends at the time, who they had been friends for a long time over the years. He had come to different things and would show up occasionally to family church events, parties, things of that nature. Brian's friend would be there off and on. So they move out and move in with his friend. It may have been a week before Jessica decided she was coming home. And then they got divorced. So they were together less than a year. I don't even know if it was 6 months from marriage. I think they were together longer. They were together longer than that, but it was brief. So their relationship's now done. Me and Brian are together though. I'm sorry, me and Colin are together though. And if somebody had a history of something, that would be used against them. So Colin had a history of following his brother. He had followed him down to Arizona. He had followed him up to Payson. And then, so my fear at the time, me and him being together, was that he was going to take off and follow his brother. And I think that it was mentioned in many processes. And I think it was probably somewhat derogatory and hurtful the way it came across. But they regularly would basically say, are you really here? Are you part of the teaching? Or are you just going to follow your brother for the rest of your life? And that's the way the processes were. They were hurtful and mean. And now when they had originally come in, there was always the promises, and this happened with everybody. There would be these promises of everything the church and the community and the family was going to do for you. So if you had some bills, it was like, oh, don't worry, we'll pay your credit cards off. We'll do this for you. We'll do that for you. They wouldn't. They would run them up, if anything. They would leave you owing more. So now me and Colin are together, which we had been for a year or so. And then Brian's gone. And then they barely talk. And that was kind of one of the unspoken rules when people left, is that you really never talked to them again. Didn't matter if they were family, didn't matter who they were. Like, your relationship with them was pretty much eliminated, and that person would be ostracized. We never talked about this. Like, if you were in the church, this was an unspoken thing. It just happened. But on the back end, and I found this out later though, when Brian and Jessica got divorced, Mike Harper, who was married to Summer, who was Jessica's sister, Trina and Steven's daughter, so it was their son-in-law, Mike Harper, who was an attorney at the time, still is an attorney to my knowledge, he was the one who wrote up the papers, the divorce papers, and he showed up to Brian's house. Now, Brian had been really close with Mike. He had been really close with Lane. Like, he had very strong relationships with these people because those were the relationships you made. You made connected relationships. I'm not saying there was an enormous amount of dysfunction. There was, but you had these really close relationships. So Mike Harper shows up on Brian's door with divorce papers and says, you guys are getting divorced. You just need to sign this. Does not give him any ability to debate anything. There wasn't really anything to split between them. I don't think there was anything to fight over necessarily. So none of that was particularly the issue. But it was just a dictatorship. Like, this is what you're going to do. And I think that the expectation and the way that people, the church would manipulate the way that things ended in this very solid wall type of way. There was no longer an opening. You were not allowed to continue communication, and you left, you got divorced. We're not friends. We're not family. We're not going to have anything to do with each other anymore. That's it. And especially in the earlier days, that is incredibly how harsh it was. So you have me and Colin getting in this relationship, and now his brother has been cut off because his brother decided to get divorced from Jessica because he decided he was leaving the cult. And I can tell you right now, I think that at the time, and I talked about the control part of where I lived as a human being at the time, I think I was so worried and in such a controlling mode of thinking that I just had to make sure that my relationship didn't fall apart as a spiritual woman. I seriously doubt I was even open to how difficult it was for Colin that his brother moved away and that he didn't really have a relationship with him after that. They didn't have a great relationship before, but I think they were trying to build some of that. When he moved to the church, would have never happened. That environment was shit. But so Colin is following in Brian's footsteps when he did show up, though, because he began to get involved with the private investigating too, and he began to work with Lane Camp. And then he grew that to another level. So he went from working in the construction business to working in that business and actually building an entire business around it. He was doing loss prevention for Walmart for a long time. And then on top of the private investigating, slowly he grows that and he starts doing serving papers. So he's serving court documents on people. Then he begins to do like repoing cars. So he kind of had created a whole business. And a lot of it he did with the support of my family because my dad and Colin had a really good relationship. There was a lot of love and care there. Now, I think at the time I was working at the Frozen Cow. And if people are familiar with it up in Payson, it was an ice cream shop and a sandwich shop that was opened by the cult. And it was, a little tiny place that was supposed to be just an ice cream store. And then it kind of turned into a pretty popular business. The problem with it is nobody had any business sense. Like nobody ever came up with cost of things and how things should be done. So and nobody who worked in it ever got paid a dime. It was one of our cult businesses. You worked because you were told to work. It made whatever money it made, which went into the pot, or it didn't make money and it was, something that sucked it out of it. But it was a cute little place. So I'm working there. Colin's working between doing loss prevention and stuff. And one of the other women who was my age, she had just had a baby. So it must have been like October of that year. And I remember seeing him and I immediately was like, oh my gosh, like I would love to have a baby. And that was the expectation. I'm 18 years old. I'm in a relationship. If you're not having a baby by 20, what are you even doing? Was the expectation. So I remember talking to Colin about it, and he said, yeah, let's do it. And so that's when we decided we were going to have a family. Now, we're not engaged yet. We're not married yet, any of those types of things. But we decide that we're going to have a baby. So I think I was pregnant immediately, probably. So I found out I was pregnant within a month from that, because the second that I decided I wanted to have a baby, we were pregnant shortly thereafter. I don't, didn't take long. So I think by Christmas, I think is when Colin proposed. And then the wedding plans got started. Now, when I say the wedding plans got started, let me explain what that means. I think that there's this part of women that always think about being in the relationship with that person that you're going to want to be with the rest of your life. But then there's all the dreams that go along with the wedding. And I had tried to squash all of those years before, because I had seen the other people who had gotten married and realized that there was very few people that had any kind of ideal of what I wanted for a wedding. So I just left. It was another thing that I let go of thinking that I would ever be able to have. And you didn't get to pick your wedding. It was thrown on by the church, and you showed up. So normal people, not in cults, get to dream about the music, dream about the location, dream about the flowers, the wedding cake, the dress, the food, the person, right? You dream and you fantasize, envision, whatever you want to call it, about all of these things, but that's not the situation we were in. So for me, everybody would check in with me here and there, and it was like, oh, hey, this is what we're doing for you. And that was simultaneously being done with a baby shower. Again, like a baby shower is one of those things you're thinking about all the things that you want to have. The theme, the picking things out, excuse me. But I didn't get to have any of that. So they decided my wedding was going to be on the 4th of July. The women sewed my dress. It was this horrid gold. It was like this golden peachy kind of color. They bought and arranged flowers. Everybody cooked and made food. I mean, it was beautiful. The cake was beautiful. We didn't pick somebody to be our first best man or bridesmaid or anything like that. We didn't pick any of that. It was done by whoever was running it at the time. A lot of it was done by Marlo and my mom. And I just kind of showed up. And there was, there was a lot of people there. My wedding was one that was very few children at. Colin's brother didn't come. Brian didn't actually come to our wedding. I 100% guarantee he wasn't invited. And then we walked down the aisle. My sister walked down for me. Lane, who was very close to Colin at the time, walked down with him. And I mean, it was beautiful. It was a fun party. It is nothing I would have picked. Colin played guitar at the time. And they kind of had a band going with some other people in the church. And so they played music all night while I sat there. And that was nothing I would have ever chosen. It was horrible. And then everybody got wasted. Again, and at the time, I'm 9 months pregnant. 8.5 months pregnant. Everybody got wasted. Would get and did basically like band like karaoke and sang drunkenly through half the night. And it was so far from anything that I ever dreamed of. That is, there's no way to look back and try and make it better than it was. Lane gets up at one point during our wedding and starts crying and begging Colin to never leave like Brian did because he was still so hurt about Brian leaving. And then that was it. We went and we stayed one night at a hotel up in Flagstaff. And I was so incredibly pregnant. And then we came back. And then there was a big process that I didn't go to because I wasn't allowed to, because if you were super pregnant, you weren't supposed to go to processes because it was too intense while you were while you had a baby inside of you. So it was a blessing and a curse. And one of the main things that was a part of the process was my older sister getting ripped to shreds about being too sexual at my wedding. And I mean, I have a picture of her at my wedding, you guys. She was in like this boxy green dress that I think had parrots on it or something like that. It was not revealing. It probably was almost cut like this, like except for covered more shoulder. Like it didn't swoop down or anything. And she was accused of being too sexual at my wedding and ripped to shreds for it. And that it was her energy for being in competition with me, which was used a lot. A lot of times we had that you're in competition with your sister, and that's why you're whatever ensued after that. And then a week later was my baby shower, and that was beautiful. Again, it was sweet. It was wonderful. Again, there's nothing I can complain about it except for the fact that I didn't get to choose it. It was life dictated for you, not by you. And so that was the beginning of our little family. And there's not a lot of things that I get very emotional about, but there's parts that I look back on that it's just it's still unbelievable to me that that was my life. Because my life is so different now, right? Like the person I am today, I it's hard for me to relate where I was almost. And it's still painful. Having gone through that, having gone through having no power. You know, I had no power over any of it. So, um, give me just a moment to try to compose myself. So, from there, me and Colin are married, about to have a baby. We got married on the 4th. The baby shower was a week later. And my son was born a couple weeks after that. And on top of that, so another thing too is I didn't even know what I was having, because they decided I was not allowed to know whether or not I was having a boy or a girl, because I had to be surprised by everybody, because everybody thought it would be fun if I got surprised by that. Anyway, so this one's been eye-opening. Didn't know I was this emotional about any of this stuff, but I try to be transparent. That's why I record these pretty much through and give you guys even the ups and downs of how I am through it. And I think that the lesson that I'd love to share with you that was really important for me when I have reviewed those times is that you are the one who should be making decisions in your life based off of how you feel in here. Because it's one thing to regret you making a poor decision. You know, you were younger then, all that kind of stuff. I never have a lot of regret about the decisions I make in my life now, because they come from my heart, because I'm really strong in who I am, and I've worked very hard to become strong in who I am. And you know, if it's a mistake, it's a mistake, and I can learn and I can grow and I can see the blessing in that. But the decisions that were made for me when I was younger, those are the ones that I still have trouble with, because I wasn't strong enough. And which is okay too. It's okay that I wasn't strong enough at the time. That was also a lesson that I needed to learn. But get very strong in who you are and the decisions that you're making in your life, so that you enjoy looking back and going, yeah, it wasn't a great decision, but it was mine. The times that were manipulated by other people or dictated to, those are the times when you look back and you're like, ooh, that one's hard. That's a real toughie right there. And that stuff is not as fun to review. And I am an open book about reviewing the things that I've been through, because it helps me to move forward, and it helps me to grow, and it helps me to forgive those people, and it helps me to forgive myself. And forgiving myself is a huge one. Like, I have to forgive myself for the growth I didn't have yet, There's nothing wrong with that. We are constantly growing and blossoming into newer, better, stronger versions of ourselves. And that's a wonderful thing too. So, hope you guys have enjoyed today's episode. I did not know that would do that. That was cool. I will see you on the next one. Please like, follow, comment, and share. If you know somebody else who would enjoy this story, please share it with them. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.